Joe Casey, you have written a ton of IP for Marvel and DC. You've done creator-owned stuff for Marvel or for Image. I'm sorry, Image.
Well, I've
And
created
you've
things,
also
for Marvel too. Don't worry.
yeah. You've done we'll probably get into that if we have
Yeah.
time. Uh, but you know, one of the things I really love about your work is that you're able to come in and work with other people's creations, and I feel like there's a real special marriage of the past and the present when a person doesn't like totally ignore what's come before them and they really try and like put their own stamp, but at the same time, you know, keep with the character. And
Well,
I feel you
yeah.
do that quite a bit, and
Well,
yeah, we're seeing that coming up soon, right?
yes. Well, I mean, to me, it's a part of the tradition of, I guess, just work for hire comics. I mean, I grew up on Frank Miller taking over Daredevil and Alan Moore taking over Swamp Thing and Miller getting his hands on Batman and all these reinventions, Simonson on Thor, all these reinventions of old classics, where the job is to take something that's been around and put a fresh coat of paint on it, try to look at it in a new way. And, when you grow up reading those books and you love that approach, then once you get in, that's part of what you want to do. So a lot of the work for hire gigs I've taken have had a component of that. I was lucky that I started out doing that when I took over the cable book at Marvel. It was just the right time. I mean, James Robinson wrote it before me, and he got me in there. He had already started the process of putting that fresh coat of paint on that character, and I just kind of followed through with it. But it was exactly what in my mind, I'd trained my whole life to do. So it's just it's a part of those work for hire gigs for me, and I quite enjoy it actually.
When you were reading comics as a kid growing up, just so I can like, you know, judge you. Just joking.
Hmm.
What were you reading at the time?
I was a big Avengers guy. That was kind of my jam.
Really?
And yeah, my formative period of that was the Jim Shooter, David Michelinie era. That kind of 160 to 200. Uh, I mean, that's the earliest memories I have is reading those comics, and they really, those are the ones that really impacted me. I read other things too, obviously, but that sort of George Perez, John Byrne, and then back to George Perez run is still the benchmark for me, and it's the thing that I've gone back to so many times just to try to dissect and figure out what was it about those books that had such a effect on me as a kid, and I still don't know, which means that's sort of a hallmark of a classic. I think is if you can go back to it and still find things about it, discover things about it. I may never crack that code, but that was the big book for me.
When I got into Avengers, it was probably like around. Well, I distinctly remember like the Quicksilver and the Rain with Scarlet Witch. You know, like in the
Sure.
180s, 190s.
Yeah.
Um, I had a I had a tweet experience with someone yesterday, and I just took exception a little bit to the fact that they said that Avengers number 200 was the worst professionally written book ever. And since you're a big Avengers fan and you've dealt with subjects that are, you know, that are out there for some people, How do you feel about Avengers number 200? Is it the worst professionally written book ever?
No, absolutely not. But it is one of the most misguided books when it comes to character and
Hmm.
characterization. And I know the whole history about that issue, how I can't believe the decisions that were made and why they were made. I mean, who cares that there was an issue of What If that was similar? It's a fucking what if,
Hmm.
that those issues, with rare exceptions, would come and go. So to derail what was probably one of Marvel's top books in deference to what was probably one of Marvel's lowest selling books, that I'll never understand at all.
Right.
And the damage that it did to the Miss Marvel character was, I mean, it's, say what you will about the movie and the latest iteration of that character, it's a big comeback from that low point. Huge comeback, because that character should never have, in a different parallel universe, that character never comes back. She's just so damaged from that story alone. And I feel
Do
awful. I feel awful for the creators involved, because they're all of them are favorites of mine. Everyone that's involved in that story is a childhood favorite of mine, from
mm.
Jim Shooter to David Michelinie to Bob Layton, who helped out, to George Paris, who drew it. I love all those guys' work, but man, that's that issue is some bullshit.
People now with the lens of today look at it and it's 100 times worse than it probably was at the time.
Well, yeah, by today's standards, it's 10 times worse. But it got a lot of blowback even at the time. There was a
Hmm.
famous article written about it, and then, of course, Claremont came back in an Avengers Annual and tried to. He didn't try to. He totally threw the character, vented his rage, because he built that character up into something genuine, and they just totally ruined it. And so he came back and bitch slapped him around a little bit, and rightly so. Um, but is it the worst comic ever written? No, far from it. Far from it.
You wouldn't have written any of the worst comics ever written professionally, would you have?
Me? I
Yeah,
hope
you.
not. God, I mean, it's a matter of. I'm sure some people might hold that opinion. I personally don't, but I'm biased.
I was reading and I was just kind of boning up, and I looked at some YouTube videos, see if there's anybody. And you're so the cult person you were saying before the show. Uh, not everybody. God, everybody should know who Joe Casey is, and they
Huh.
probably read a lot of stuff, whether they know it or not. But um, uh, I was reading a review of someone's Wildcats, in the comments section, and
Uh-huh.
holy cow, they are so upset with that boss's wife employee dynamic thing that I'm not
Oh
going to
yeah.
spoil it for anybody.
Well, they should be. They should be. It's horrible behavior. You know.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I was shocked. I was reading it at the time. I got to admit. Um,
Well,
do
it
you
was a,
think
it
you
was
could
a
pull that off now?
no, not in a million years. I mean, the thing was, it was a mature reader's title, and I was being, you know, encouraged, not on that particular storyline, but just in general, encouraged to push the limits and be and deserve the mature reader's title. There was a version of the first issue that did not have the naked grifter scene,
Hmm.
and then when I turned it in, they said, you could go a little further with this. We'll give you a couple extra pages, put in something that's a little more risque or that really earns the label. I said, well, all right, well, that's easy enough. And so, with that nudge, I kind of really dove deep, and I was really interested in taking. I mean, as long as they were going to give me that mature readers cover, I was going to take advantage of it and really subvert and morph and change what had initially, let's face it, just been a X-Men knockoff. But in that iteration, I was able to really break down the morality of these characters, and not concern myself with good versus evil. Um, and I mean, we're talking, yeah, it was this is 20 years ago too. I mean, it was a totally different environment back then. But yeah, I wouldn't even consider a story like that now unless I was going to cast that character as a complete evil bastard bad guy. You know?
Sure. What a lot of people get all upset about Deathstroke and his alliance with Terra.
Right. Right.
I was a kid at the time, so I looked at him as like the worst person possible, corrupting this person that was young like me.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, obviously, as a child, I didn't quite see it in the same way, but it was more or less written for me, also.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it was back then they'd get very. It was all very representational. Like you see Tara with the makeup and the negligee on, and that was supposed to indicate, oh, she's, more adult than she let on, and it's all shorthand. It's all visual shorthand. But
Right.
yeah, in the lens today, it's a bit cringy for sure.
It is, I mean, for sure. But I mean, these are still like dynamics that occur in real life, whether people want to like admit it or not. And if you're casting the CAD of, you just don't want them to be on the side of the good guys, I assume.
Right.
But
right.
they've done that with Deathstroke so often that they try and make him like an anti-hero or something, that they have to like, wipe it under the rug or something like that. Sweep it.
Well, it doesn't do anybody any good at this point. The climate is not encouraging to take those kind of risks because the disadvantages are too great. It's too much of a pain in the ass.
Well, thankfully they still reprint it.
But everything, even some things that are considered classic, are still of their time. They have elements that are of their time, and if you have a problem with it, then just avoid it. Don't read it, but you're missing out on some great stuff at the same time.
All right, which leads us into your new project. Of its time, you are telling a Dutch story, which was a member of Team Youngblood, I do believe.
Yes.
Back in the 90s. I have a big box full of all the Youngblood stuff, Extreme Studios.
I think a lot of people do. I'm counting on it, actually.
Right. It's tough to get those people back in the store sometimes. And not only that, but when they come back and look at an Image comic normally, they're not seeing what they remember.
Right.
So how are you going to address that using this? This is not a Rob Liefeld character.
No, that's the only reason this thing exists, is that Rob doesn't own Dutch. Chap Yape does, who was the artist on the Team Youngblood book when it launched. Written by Eric Stevenson, as a matter of fact.
All right.
And because Chap owned Dutch and still owns Dutch, it was not part of the whatever miasma that's occurred with the Youngblood, with Rob's Youngblood characters, to which we would have no access to and have no access to. And as far as I know, Rob doesn't have access to them either. I'm not quite sure what the ins and outs of that deal is, but from all that I can, glean from the internet, those characters are just basically unavailable to anybody for any reason.
Some crazy dude, I can't remember the name. I was on a show with Bill Willingham, actually, and this guy owns the Elementals also.
Yeah.
And
I know his name. I just don't want to say it. I know his name.
Oh, okay, very good. Yeah, I mean, you can look it up, people.
Yeah.
But why bother?
He had something to do with Kamiko, which is why he owns the Elementals now, and then he went on to get his fingers in other people's IP.
Matt Wagner, during the Kamiko days, he stood his ground, and he wasted all that Grendel Batman. It was supposed to come out for years, and it was held up. And Mage, I'm assuming, was the same way, but he was able to eventually keep his stuff, which is cool.
Yes, yeah, good for him. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Are you a fan?
What was that?
When you go to comics and you grow up and you're doing the superhero stuff, what I was lucky as a kid growing up was we had so many um, alternate, like Pacific Comics and
Yeah,
First and Eclipse. Did you like Matt Wagner's what Mage and Grendel when you were probably a little older than me, maybe younger?
I was a huge Matt Wagner fan. I loved Mage. I loved Grendel. I love everything he did. He's a great guy, and he's disappointed me. Anything he's ever done from the very beginning, and Grendel especially is a big influence just in the scope of that series and how he changed it up from the Panda Brothers to Bernie Moreau to John K. Snyder to Tim Sale. It really this kind of epic sweep, different storytelling techniques that he used. Huge, huge influence on me. I was a big fan of all that mid '80s independent stuff. It really hit right when I normally probably would have phased out of comics. I was hitting that age where if it had just been the Marvel and DC stuff, considering what was going on, with a few exceptions, I mean, it was happening. I could tell I was outgrowing the hobby, I guess you could say. But things like Nexus and Badger and American Flag and Mage and Grendel and all that stuff, Journey, all that stuff kept me in it. It sort of it bridged the gap of my teenage years where I would normally find it, and I had other interests, obviously, but I might have abandoned comics if it weren't for that '80s independent wave. So it was a big, big deal to me.
Now, Image is, I don't know if it's quite the same, but as far as like having other voices and other types of stories out there, um, with exceptions, I mean, sometimes, quality control could occur.
Huh.
um, uh, like, sex criminals and a book called Sex coming out at the same time. That's
Well,
a rough one.
Sex came out. Just be clear about that.
Yeah, right. Image is kind of like that area now for your late teens and early 20s person that's like reading comic books, right?
Well, I would hope so. I mean, when it comes to the Dutch story, to go back to your earlier question, what I'm hoping is that the kids, and I think they were mostly kids who read those Image comics and invested in them. I don't mean monetarily. I mean invested in the continuity, the early continuity of those comics. I'm hoping that they're curious about a character that they read 30 years ago. What he's doing now, which is what the story is. It's not trying to present some sort of. It's not a flashback tale. It's what's Dutch up to 30 years later in real time. And for the readers of those early comics, I hope that's of interest to them as much as it was for people who, I mean, not to compare, this is not a quality comparison, this is just sort of hyperbolic example. But a lot of readers who had read Batman comics when they were kids in the 60s and 70s had checked out because it was just the same old, same old. But then when Dark Knight Returns comes around and it's Batman at 50, well, just that alone was like, oh, the character's grown up with us. Let's check it out. So we're trying to go for that same type of vibe with this story and with what's going to follow. So it's quite an experiment to see how many, the well-worn term lapsed readers of this era of comics, how many there are out there, and whether or not they'll come back and check this out. It'll be interesting to see.
You're the only story that's running in this Image anthology, which is a 30th anniversary, 12 part, 12 every month of the year.
Yeah.
And yours is the only story that isn't your creator owned book or story. But it's also something that actually occurred back when Image first founded.
Well, I mean, when Eric came to me and offered me, a slot in the book, the first instinct was, well, can I do something? Can I bring back something I've done at Image already, or should I do something new? And most people are doing something new, which is cool. I mean, that's what Image Comics is built on. But once I thought about it and kind of cycled through some of my own ideas, I thought, somebody should do something that actually marks the 30 years, in a way that acknowledges that 30 years ago, when Image started, there was a shared continuity, a shared universe. And what would it be like to plug back into that in real time? Because I know that Todd McFarlane and Spawn has his own kind of continuity that's gone on for 30 years. Eric Larson and Savage Dragon has his continuity that's gone on for 30 years. I'm not quite sure they match up anymore. And they certainly don't acknowledge the wider Image Comics universe that existed in 1992 and 93. So this is really seems like an outlier. And I've even fallen victim to it. I did a Youngblood book, and I think, I don't know, 2007, 2008. And even then, it was 15 years after Image had debuted, and I didn't even acknowledge the time that had passed. I didn't say, oh, it's 15 years later. I just kind of fudged things so it would seem like a relevant modern comic book that was, still. It didn't have anything to do with the time passage, but this has everything to do with the time passage.
And like you said, bridging the gap, and the first incarnation of Image was Youngblood #1, right?
Yeah.
And right. Since we can't have Youngblood, at least we're lucky enough to have this Youngblood character, and you don't have to deal with that nutso guy.
Right. Whoever he is. And
whoever he is.
You've read the first story, the first chapter. You can see in it that there's more extreme characters that Rob did not own at the time, that he didn't create, that we have some access to.
Yeah.
And so we're going to try, going forward, we're going to take a shot at building out this universe without Youngblood having been a part of it. It's going to be very interesting. I mean, it's a challenge for sure, but I like those kind of challenges.
All right, so now this issue that you are writing for Dutch is going to be in 3 consecutive issues of this Image book.
Right.
And it's
number 5, number 6, and number 7.
Right. So I'll be ordering extra of those for my customers out there. I would recommend getting it. The first story is, well, these are like 8-page stories throughout, and so when we get through 3 of them, it'll be basically an issue of a comic book that we're going to be reading.
Correct.
I like it. I
would consider it like a pilot episode.
Right, and only Top Cow gets to do that.
Yeah, well,
I've
done those too.
Wait, what did you do for that?
I did the first round. I did a Velocity with Kevin McGuire, which actually won, and then the actual miniseries fell apart for all kinds of reasons.
It's actually because of Michel Fiffe. Do you know who that is?
Of course, good friend of mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He's really big on that 90s stuff, and he's like probably a few years younger than me, easy. But it's like so exciting to see these kids liking the Youngblood stuff and the extreme stuff and the early Image stuff. That he's actually gains a relevance that maybe it didn't have necessarily beforehand, because everybody's like, it's all lines and Rob Liefeld can't draw and all this other stuff. These characters are just obvious ripoffs of other things like that. But to those kids, this was like really the first stuff that they saw that was new and fun. And I don't know what I'm really going for there, but
it's the same thing with the Star Wars prequels, right? I mean, they have more respect now than they've ever had, because the kids that watched them originally, while the old farts who saw the original trilogy were like, "This sucks. What's happened? This is terrible." The kids who watched it are now 20 years older, and they're carrying their nostalgia like a badge of honor, and they're waving the flag for the Star Wars prequels. It's like, no, these are great movies. We love these, and that's why, whatever your personal opinion of it, that's why the Obi-Wan show even happened. You lick your finger and you test the wind and you see that, oh, it's time for this stuff to come back. It's time for this stuff to be embraced again, or at least, or not even again, embraced for the first time on a scale that you couldn't have imagined 20 years ago. And so it's a lot of that stuff's going on. I'm hoping it proves out for this thing too, even though there's no guarantees in comics anymore. But I'm hoping there's some people who remember those old comics and remember them fondly and really, you know, feel like I feel about those Avengers comics. They feel that way about these Youngblood comics and these Team Youngblood comics and the whole shared image universe. We'll see. We'll see.
When I was working at Comic Relief in Berkeley, it was in my late 20s, early 30s. And Joe Casey and Joe Kelly and Jeff Loeb and Mark Schultz were writing Superman books. And, Superman gets a real bad rap from, I don't know, should I say like normies, people that don't read DC?
Sure.
The outsiders, they just see what they know of Superman and just kind of like pass it off as this is a lame character. But what you guys were doing was not only were you writing for, a younger audience, but it wasn't for a younger audience. It was easily accessible to younger readers, I think, the way it was written. But you were actually writing mainstream books for people that should have phased out by this time. And I really appreciate that. And I assume that, this Dutch story is going to be a lot like that also.
Well, I hope so. I mean, it's not necessarily about, you don't have to write in, I mean, how do I put this? Not every book for adults has to be a mature reader's book with all the R-rated bells and whistles. That's not the key to appealing to a lapsed reader that hasn't read comics or read these characters for 10, 15, 20 years. It's just about infusing quality and trying to come up with something that speaks to where they are in their lives. I mean, that's why I was so adamant about it, making sure that people know. And in the story, it's said plain as day, it's been 30 years. Because the people, I think, the readers who will be interested in this, it's 30 years later for them too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I don't know, I hope that's where they find something of value in it beyond the nostalgia of it. I mean, the nostalgia is great and I'm all for nostalgia, but if it was only that, I don't know if I would be interested in writing it. I want to examine an archetypal character, which Dutch is. Dutch is an archetype of that sort of cybernetic super soldier, big guns, big shoulder pads, big army, armament kind of character that was a trope of the early 90s. So let's take that archetype and examine it 30 years later. What's that like? It was interesting to write. It's interesting to think about moving forward from this point too.
So if this does well, or it's going to happen regardless of how well it does, there is going to be more to come.
There will be more to come. Yeah, I can safely say that there will be more to come.
Do you read comics these days? Do you read a lot of stuff out there, or any of it?
I mean, I feel like I have my ear to the ground. I'm not a Wednesday warrior anymore, but I know what's out there, and you were saying earlier about that phrase, "It's not for me," coming out a lot.
Yeah,
I feel the same way, but I'm not bitter about it. It's just that's how it is. There's most of the stuff that I would normally plug into just doesn't connect with me right now, and that's fine.
Are there like surefire things that like you have to pick it up no matter what? Like, let's say Jeff Darrow doing a Shaolin Cowboy. Are you like, I gotta have that regardless?
I mean, things like that. I know they'll be collected. I mean, I know it's horrible to say, but that'll be collected, so I can kind of wait it out. I've gotten pretty good at waiting things out. I'm mostly these days, I guess, when I can get to a store, like I'm a dumpster diver, I guess you could say. I mean, today I was in a store and I bought two old um, Marvel Masterworks hardcovers that were on sale, like they were in the bargain bin, but they were like Avengers 11 through 30 over the two volumes, and I was like, yeah, I'm into it. I'm even though I have them in other formats, I never really bought the Masterworks, the hardcover Masterworks. So that to me was that's a good day. That's a good purchase for me.
You have been able to work with a bunch of groups when you're like working mainstream stuff. Like you had that X-Men Grant Morrison, I guess two-person group.
Yeah,
You had the Superman group. I guess that kind of stems from like the Louise Simonson days or something.
yeah, yeah.
But how was that like? How was that? I mean, do you think that was really good? Were you guys like bouncing the ideas off each other, so much that it was like, creatively stimulating, or was it just like, all right, this is what I got to do, write down this stuff, and
Well, no, I
or something
mean,
else?
in those cases, except for Mark Schultz, who I did not know, but who I got to know, and is a great guy, a great creator. I was friends with everybody that I'd worked with before I worked with them in those environments. So you're coming into it with familiarity and appreciating what the other guys are bringing to the table, and so it's not a difficult collaboration. I mean, there's always a bumps in the road, but for the most part, it was pretty smooth sailing. And I haven't really been in a situation that was, um, intolerable, because I work enough alone on my own stuff that you get your kicks being a solo act, and that alleviates the pressure when you're working in a collaborative way. I mean, I've been working with my partners in Man of Action now for 20 years. So I get that feedback, that sort of feedback loop of like you're working with other writers you respect and you learn from, and but then I can go off and do my own thing and not have to answer to anybody. So I get the best of both worlds.
So Men of Action, that's you and Steven Siegel, right?
Yep.
And Duncan Rouleau and Joe Kelly, right?
Correct. Correct.
All
Yeah.
right. But I was in that interview. You were saying that Nathan Fox works for you guys, or works with you guys also.
No, no, no. That's
No,
Nathan
or was it
Fox.
Chap Yape?
No, Chap Yape worked on. He was a designer on Ben 10 for a while.
Gotcha,
But he was. I mean, he was hired by Cartoon Network. He wasn't like our hire.
gotcha.
But
So
yeah,
it's just you four.
yeah, it's just the four of us. We wouldn't subject anybody else to our dysfunction.
No, I like that. It seems like a lot of times that when people do hire outside, it kind of screws it up a bit.
Yeah,
Well,
there's a dynamic that we've worked hard to come to grips with, and we just it's true. I mean, I couldn't imagine punishing anyone else with that experience. It's the four of us till the end, I think.
right. Do you watch Adventure Brothers?
I have, yeah,
It feels like those are just two guys though.
yeah,
But they're very insular also.
yeah.
Which again, I think it's a really great show, and we watch it here often. I love the way they like they build the stories and the characters and this and all the past stuff builds very well together.
Oh yeah, no. If you did comic books, that's a great show. I mean, that takes up a lot of the tenets of long form comic book storytelling and applies it to animation, which is very cool.
But now your animation has mostly been for younger audiences, right?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think that's yeah.
30-year-olds shouldn't be watching it, maybe.
Probably not. I mean, they could. I mean, I think some of the stuff we did for Marvel when we did the Avengers and Spider-Man for Marvel back when they were had shows on Disney XD, those kind of, well, no, those were probably for kids too. What am I
No, I'm
saying?
just joking. I didn't really mean it that way. What I mean is that's you guys' stuff. You know, you're making it for, again, you do a very good job. You personally do a very good job bridging that. This is a thing for kids that an adult can enjoy, that should enjoy.
Well, I mean, if you think back to, that Avengers 200, which as misguided as it is, the misguided part of that story is pretty brutal. For I was, you know, I mean, preteen is putting it mildly. I was just a young kid when I read that. So and the issues around it. I mean, the stuff that Jim Shooter was writing with Hank Pym's mental breakdown, that's pretty heady stuff for, in my case, of I was 7 years old probably, but I was reading it and loving it, and the things I didn't get, I was getting a sense of that was more grown up subject matter. But it was still pretty intense, and I don't know why that eventually. I mean, well, I know why. I'm just not happy about it. That stuff got neutered over the years, where helicopter parents felt very protective of their kids, and I can see that. But when publishers respond to that by going, "Well, this isn't Marvel, this is Marvel Adventures, or this isn't DC, this is DC Adventures," or whatever the branding was, that allowed things to be very sanitized and very sort of FCC monitored, even though they were comic books, you definitely lose something that, thank God, I was not subjected to when I was a kid. I just was reading regular mainstream comics.
Right, exactly. Well, it was a different type of creator, obviously. I know that when a parent comes in and they're like, "Oh, I gotta get some Spider-Man for my kid," usually the first thing I pick up is like the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko stuff, and
Yeah,
there's not going to be any cursing in it. Pretty much it's straightforward stories and nothing too bad. I'm not going to give a kid, Craven's Last Hunt
right.
to start them off with. Here's some Watchmen for you.
Yeah. But at the same time, I was a teenager when I read those stories,
Uh-huh.
and
Well,
I've
yeah. Yeah.
so but that's why I say I have a lot of respect for retailers, because they have to, curate for their customer base, and also avoid trouble, which I know that is lying out there like landmines. I mean,
Not in Berkeley though.
I guess not in but I think more of like Middle America and things like that. I mean, it's got to be a tough beat for a lot of retailers to be able to get maybe new readers on the right path without causing the ire of their parents or getting into trouble on some level. I mean, I just can't imagine.
It's blown out the window when there's a Dynamite cover right next to something.
Sure, yeah, fair.
What do you get? That's the probably Dynamite covers. I mean, I've had little kids come in with their parents buying Walking Dead, and I'm watching them, buy the collection in parts, and I know this, like, there's going to be that prison scene,
Yeah,
and that's going to be like, I don't know if the parents there. What can I do?
right. Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's a judgment call with, I think, every customer in every situation, that it would wear me out. That's all I can say. It would wear me the fuck out.
Have you seen about that What If comic book and how much like heat the writer's been taking for that by any chance? Have you heard
Yeah,
about that?
Yeah, I haven't seen the issue in question, but I've seen all the controversy around it. Yeah.
Because you're not a social media person at all, right?
No,
Uh,
no.
I heard in one of your previous interviews, you said you would like look at Wizard magazine, and that was kind of like the social media of the day.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Were you
I mean,
ever were you ever like in the top 10 as a writer during that time?
sure,
How
sure.
high did you make it?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know that. I
Oh,
mean, I know I never made it to number. I mean, I was never number one. I think
Peter
I think.
David's always blocking you.
Well, it won't. Those lists are pretty fixed, from day one. So when I was doing X-Men, I knew I would end up on that list for a couple of months, and of course I did. You know,
Do you think it was warranted, or do you think you should have been on during a different time of your career?
no, I think it was warranted because I feel like those lists were based on sales and based on heat at the time. And when I was writing Uncanny X-Men and Grant was writing New X-Men, we were number one and number two for at least almost the first year. So in that respect, I mean, we should have been on that list. You know,
So Godland, I would if I don't talk to you a little bit about Godland,
sure,
I would be failing at my duty.
okay,
Um, is it Tom Scioli?
Shioli,
Scioli, okay. Tom Scioli and you did Godland, which if I was selling it at the store like I was at the time, and to let anybody know, I always give money back on the trade if I sell it to you, the first trade. So bring it back if you don't like it. And usually I've sold the series more often, but it's kind of if we're talking about family and because of art style and because of the space aspect to it, I'm going to call it like a Fantastic Four type story.
okay.
I mean, Shioli's doing his version, I think, of Kirby Crackle, right? Isn't that what it's called?
Well, that's the effect. Yeah, I mean, it was just a
Yeah,
general Kirby style. Yeah,
yeah. I mean, it's this is all. It felt very homagey. Wrong company. um, uh, but God, Godland was amazing. The characters were so fresh and inventive, and maybe they talked like we did in the day.
right, right.
Like I'm thinking of like when we first meet Basil, and he's talking about the dude from the home the home fixer up, or I can't remember the guy's name, Ty.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Oh
there's gonna be some like colloquialisms of the day,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I think the characters themselves transcend that, and they're so inventive. How much was I gotta know, like, how much was it you? How much was it Scioli? Were you guys just like riffing off each other, and it was the way it was?
Yeah, it was pretty equal because I'd known Tom stuff. He'd done a book before that called The Myth of Eight Opus,
Mm-hmm.
which was just another kind of Kirby riff. And Eric Larson kind of did the matchmaking there. He got us together, and we got along instantly, bonding over our shared love of old Kirby stuff. And so it was pretty quick. We were just bouncing ideas off each other. And I think my job in the partnership was to kind of organize it into a bigger story. And I mean, we did it. We used the Marvel method, which is we'd talk about things generally, then I'd write sort of an outline that organized it into a narrative story, and then Tom would draw it, and then I would dialogue. We wanted to do that method specifically to try to get that kind of alchemy going, and it really worked. It really worked. Um, I my I ended up calling it improv comics because the outlines were fairly sparse. I mean, they were the movement was there, but not necessarily the character content. And then when I'd get the art back, I'd just sit down and go, okay, well, what am I in the mood to write? What's in my head at that moment to put in these characters' mouths? And with an eye towards an overall overarching story, but not too much. We were kind of making it up as we went along, and at some point, we thought, okay, we this thing has come to a boil. Now let's figure out how to wrap it up in a satisfying way. And that was the most daunting thing about that whole series, was how to end it, where it felt right and it felt natural and felt satisfying to us as much as it did to the readers. And I feel like we accomplished it. I'm pretty proud of that finale issue that we did, because it was just so weird. It didn't betray the ethos of the series, which is to kind of improv our way through this cosmic drama, but at the same time hide up things and put a period at the end of the sentence, I guess.
Now, towards the end of the series, there were a few delays, right?
Mm-hmm. to say the least.
How is it? Like you guys were chugging along pretty good in the beginning.
Yeah.
Like the 6 issues would come out, you wait a month, the trade comes out, you wait a month, the series starts up. At least it felt that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is it? How do you go back into writing something? Was it, was it easy? Was it just like, getting back up, getting on that bike again? Or, was there some difficulty?
Well,
or were you always writing it? It just took a while.
No. I mean, it was always in progress. It just sometimes it took longer than others. And looking back, I can't point to any one thing, except life happens,
Yeah.
And in creator-owned comics, I think we were pretty steady for about 2 years. And once you've done that, I mean, this is going to sound like a real bullshit argument, so I apologize in advance, but this is really the truth. Once you've done that grind for 2 years steady, and you see where your sales are, you see where you've sort of plateaued, and they're probably not going to get any better. It has nothing to do with the quality of your work. You know the market, where your book sits within the landscape of the marketplace. The incentive to kind of put it out on a regular basis lessens considerably, because it doesn't affect your sales. It's, momentum or lack of it doesn't affect your sales. So why kill yourself when you don't have to? And it wasn't like we were late soliciting. We wouldn't solicit and then miss our shipping dates. So we were very careful not to get into that trap. But at some point, I was like, and Tom and I agree. We're like, okay, we're not going to solicit this month. We're going to give ourselves a little breather. And once you get on that path, it never got out of control, but it can escalate, where you're like, okay, why don't we take 2 months off, or why don't we take 3 months off, or whatever it was. And it was never. We knew we would finish it. We just gave ourselves a little break in terms of when that would be. And I also felt like there was not creative burnout, but I felt like if we're going to end this, I need to give myself a little time to come up with something that feels right, because I'd been doing it long enough by then, not just the series, but I've been doing my job long enough by then to know different strategies, how to get the best out of myself, how to get the best out of my collaborators, how to come to the best idea. Sometimes the deadline pressure really works, and you come up with cool shit because you have to come up with something. And the drama of, we got to get it done because we got to get it out, gives you the incentive to do really cool shit. But sometimes you need the time and the space to let your brain kind of relax and get out of that deadline grind so that really cool shit can happen. So you got to make that judgment as you go along. And with Godland, the first 2 years we were feeding off the adrenaline, but the last year and a half of issues that came out, even though it took probably, I mean, it took a lot longer than a year and a half, but those last 16 or so issues, it probably, I would say, I don't remember exactly, but I would say it took at least 4 years to get out those 16, 17 issues.
Right.
But I look back and the story turned out the way it should have turned out. So I don't regret anything in terms of delays, as long as we weren't keeping retailers on the hook for solicitation that wasn't meeting its ship date. I was okay with it,
I very rarely want to read a superhero book where a character has no possibility of interacting with Spider-Man or Superman. I mean, why? That really is what it comes down to. And
Yeah.
I cannot tell. I mean, I know it's stroking you, but there's no finer superhero comic than Godland.
Oh, thanks.
Oh yeah. I mean, I yeah, I shilled it like crazy. It was important, and not only that, this is a very good book for that lapsed fan from like the 60s and 70s, and that it existed for them was good also. I've seen it in action.
Oh, that's good. That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. No, great series. Can I just a little bit longer going into that whole idea of you've seen sales, you aren't really in another book that you did, and it's not necessarily for sales. You were working on Intimates, right?
Yeah.
That's the name of the book.
Yes.
And it's basically a high school, so that villains, and it's My Hero Academia, I assume.
Well, it's a school for superheroes and training.
Exactly. And there's going to be people that are villains, and there's all sorts of, shenanigans going on. But one of the things that you did was you would have like these hypertext things that your lesson plans. So if you want to learn a little bit more information about this character we're seeing on page, those were pretty detailed.
Yeah.
And I think, and I gotta say, this is exactly how I think George R.R. Martin feels about writing these books. Towards the bottom, as the series was ending, you started to get. It was like secrets of comic book prose, as they write a comic as it's descending into the trash can, basically.
Yeah.
And I want to let you know, I was reading this while my back was out. That Automatic Kafka, it was going on around the same time, and I'm kind of going crazy if I'm not reading stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just like in traction, and so your books were what I was reading during that time.
Oh, nice.
And your descent in those little lessons at the bottom about how you make a comic book, how they entice you and say we're going to have these Jim Lee covers, and then we're really right behind you, and then all of a sudden where's the advertising, and then you just start really kind of shitting on the whole thing. Amazing, I gotta say.
Well, the one thing that pisses me off in any creative endeavor is short-sightedness. And there are books that I've done where I thought there was a really, I mean, sales notwithstanding, and it's not like the Intimates didn't sell. They just, it's that chicken and egg thing. Is, it wasn't a blockbuster, but I don't even remember what the first issue sold, but it was respectable, especially at the time. And for a new IP that had no real, wasn't connected to anything, even though it took place in the Wildstorm universe, it still was sort of on its own. But I thought we'd come up with something really special. And the danger of work for hire is that your publisher or editorial can abandon ship too soon. And not that I thought that book was going to last forever or should last forever, but I'm in the game to try to do something that lasts and that has legs and can be looked back on, you know, 20 years from when it came out and still seem relevant or still have value. And when you let artists get lured away to other comics, or you don't stay on doing the work that you said you might do for, I mean, and then when you let the promotion go away or anything like that, especially back then when I was much younger and much more angry, that really, that kind of shit would really piss me off, you know. And with the Intimates, you were seeing it right on the page. Every issue had some element subtracted from it that we had started out with very strong. So I was usually the last man standing when it came to having my hands on the book with, lettering corrections or whatnot. And I had an editor who was at least on board, if not just kind of busy with other things. So I figured, well, why not vent a little bit right on the page? Because at the very least, it would stand as a document of what was happening in real time. So that was the idea behind some of that stuff. I mean, not the most mature approach, but I was there were times where I wasn't the most mature creator. I'm glad. I mean, looking back now, I'm glad it exists in the form it does, because it in a way, what I did, which I can kind of feel some pride about, is that when the book, the commercial endeavor became less personal, I made it more personal. But I doubled down on it being a vehicle for my own emotional state of mind at that time, and that's I kind of like that in retrospect.
I really appreciate that one also, because again, my own like weird despair was going on during that time, and it's just that you were writing some really good trippy comics at the time also. I miss trippy comics. That's what I really miss more than anything right now. People like going out, and so much like dinner scenes and stuff like that, and just
Well, I can tell you this: my next Image comic that's creator owned will certainly scratch that itch for you.
all right, excellent. I'm very happy about that.
And
Is everything else going to be creator owned? Do you think you might ever go to like another IP, a Marvel or DC?
no, I don't rule that out. I mean, I've got things that are pending that I sort of can't talk about at the moment,
Sure.
but this, I think I told Perch this too. This last creator owned thing that I just referred to took a lot out of me, because I kind of dug deep, and I mean, I don't know if the final product will reflect that, but to me personally, it took a lot out of me to write this series. And so I'm my next batch of work that will come out, including this Dutch thing, is a little more on, I hope, the commercial side, a little more pure entertainment, as opposed to dragging my soul across broken glass to come up with some, heavy narrative that speaks to the human condition and all that kind of stuff. I've done that a lot in my career, I feel, and this last one really took a lot out of me. So the next sort of quote unquote phase of my work in comics hopefully will just be a lot of fun, entertaining action comics.
Now you slightly mentioned then Butcher Baker, Righteous Maker,
Yes,
and then 1975 also, right?
yes.
Would that would those were good. I like those too. 1975. When's the next issue coming out? That's what everybody would say.
Well, see, that
I
that
don't
was that,
know.
was the last gasp of the stealth finite series. Where I tried. I mean, Butcher Baker was the first attempt at that, where it became something that got abused. But I really felt like the mini series, soliciting things as a mini series, you were asking for trouble, because real dedicated readers we're well versed in the shape of a miniseries. In other words, if you knew something was 5 issues long, let's say, then even before you went into it, before you read the first issue, you kind of knew what you were getting in for because you knew the shape of these series. You know, the Warren Ellis's and Mark Millers of the world had trained us very well this sort of 3 act structure, applying to comics, so that even if something was 6 issues, you start to know where the 3 acts dramatically would sit. Or if it was 12 issues, you knew where the 3 acts would sit. And I was very perturbed by that because I didn't want people telegraphing my stories. So Butcher Baker was always meant to be 8 issues. But I just didn't want to tell anybody because I didn't want people telegraphing the ending. Oh, it's issue 6 of an 8 issue story. I guess we're going to start to kind of wrap this stuff up. And I didn't want that to happen. So I started I worked it out with Image. I told them what I was doing. I said, this is not going to be solicited as 1 of 8 or 1 of 3 or whatever. I'm going to just let it ride for a while and see if I can break that pattern. And it worked to a degree. But then I think other people caught on and started abusing it, and the big 2 publishers started using it as an excuse for things not selling. So I won't be doing that anymore.
You put together that annual, correct? That kind of is a different version of that thing you're talking about.
Well, that to me, in a way. I mean, and there's a second annual kind of on the books,
Right.
because I've got enough material that I initiated but didn't finish, and there's other disparate things that can make another book of that. But I mean, I knew what I was lining up for calling it that, because obviously annual suggests it's going to be once a year. But I really just wanted to use that old DC Comics 80s trade dress. I wanted to, if anybody remembers, the cover to annual is an homage to an old Batman annual that Trevor Von Eden drew.
Yeah, which one was that?
I don't remember what number it was. It was written by Mike Barr and drawn by Trevor Von Eden. It was right before he did Thriller. So this is probably 1982.
Right.
I think I'm going to take a shot in the dark. I think it might be Batman Annual number 11.
Right, I like that. I'll look.
I could be totally wrong. But so to fully homage that cover, I wanted to use the trade dress, so that kind of necessitated calling the book Annual, which is a dopey reason to call something. Reason to title something, but I've certainly, if I'm going to homage something, I'll go the full 9. I won't go halfway with it.
Even if you say you're not going to do it, you're probably going to do it. It's like if the story has to be 5 issues, right? Why shoot out another one, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And then kind of in that theme, you did that one shot. You're oh goodness, I can't remember the name of the character. The Miss America Chavez.
Oh, America Vasquez.
Vasquez, yeah.
All America Comics, number 1. Yeah.
Loved that. It was so fun. Was it Nick Dragotta on art? I can't remember.
No, he drew the original series at Marvel.
Oh, that's right.
It was actually Dustin McGuinn that did the one shot with me.
Oh, that's right. You've worked with a lot of really good illustrators in your life.
Well, I like to be known for my good taste, Yule.
I told a penciler, I'm like, wow, you got to work with a lot of really good writers. And then that person's like, well, they got to work with a really good penciler. And I'm like, oh. So I stuck my foot in my mouth really bad, and I'm embarrassed about it. But I mean, seriously, I love writing. Writing in comics is the most important thing to me, except the art, and you've never really had any dogs that I can think of. Not that I'm like going to start naming names, But like, you know, even when I don't know the person, like Nathan Fox, I mean, I do know because of your other Image stuff.
Yeah,
Or no, it was Marvel, or both, something
yeah,
like that.
yeah, both.
You've been all over the place. You know, great illustrator, but if I didn't know and I opened up the book and I was like, oh, this is good, you know, it's very important for the normal reader. I understand. And it's important to me also, but man, you know, you work with like Ladrone.
Yeah,
He doesn't do anything for Marvel anymore.
no,
They
no.
won't reprint that stuff. Or very rarely do. All the stuff, Wayringo, right, on Superman.
Yeah, Mike Ringo. Yeah,
Just like, that was the you know, they talk about golden ages and stuff like that, but you know, there was some really good talent running around during that time.
he was so great. I love that guy. Yeah,
Yeah, and then you know, working at Marvel, and they were bringing in all the people that you wouldn't expect to ever, like Sean Phillips doing an X-Men comic book. That's
yeah.
weird. That was
Well,
like, no, this will never happen.
I mean, looking back, I should have done the whole run with Sean. That would have been a lot more satisfying. Yeah, listen, I'm the guy who brought. I mean, I did Uncanny X Men 400. Had an Ashley Wood cover. Ash did pages inside. Eddie Campbell did pages inside there. Sean did some pages. It was the most eclectic X Men anniversary issue that will ever exist in the history of comics. I take some measure of pride in that, you know.
It's pretty. I agree. I mean, it just there was so much good talent running through Marvel, and they were willing to accept, you know, people that are outside the, you know, the superhero mainstream, I guess is the best way to say it. And you were just like such a beneficiary of like all this really cool stuff that we're never going to be able to see again in that style. It was a good time.
It's weird to think that, I mean, when you're in it, you don't imagine how times will change or things will move on or evolve or devolve or whatever it is that happens. But man, it always does. I honestly thought, you know, when I first started out as a professional, I thought Bob Harris would always be the editor in chief at Marvel Comics. It never dawned on me that he would not be the editor in chief, right? And I had to, when I got kind of sick of the shenanigans, I just left. I just left the company. I just stopped working for Marvel because I thought, well, the regime is not going to change, so I need to change my situation. So that's when I left the first time. And then like a year later, Bob got fired, and they brought Joe Quesada in, and Bill Jemas was there. And it was a whole new thing. And I remember being struck by it. Like, I see. I can outlast some of this shit that goes on if I just hang in there. So now, you know, we're how many EICs later at Marvel and how many regime changes at DC, and even at Image, you know, there's been I've survived. Uh, it was 3 publishers since I started doing work at Image, you know. So it's all about now. It's just playing that long game, you know. Keep working. Don't get caught up in the dramas that will inevitably pass. You know, everything changes, everything evolves, everything moves into from one circumstance to another, and keeping your eye on the ball, working with the people that you want to work with, trying to create stuff that will last and have some sense of permanence. That's what it's about, you know. All the shit that flies around these days, that all the dramas and all the outrages and all the movements and, you know, social media bullshit, that'll all fade and all pass. There'll be new shit to deal with, but it won't be the same old shit. How's that for? Was that a soapbox scream or what?
No, I enjoy that. That was very good. Would you play a stupid game with me for a second?
Sure.
Okay. So I have this thing where, you know, I have my guest on the show. They have to pick one of the 4 people or things. If I would have known about Avengers, I would have got the most problematic Avengers covers, including like number 200.
Uh huh.
I mean, you know, stories.
Yeah.
Have Hank Pym slapping Janet, and what
Yeah.
other Jocasta stuff is going on.
Right.
And I would say, all right, you can only pick one of these to remain. The rest are gone. So with that in mind, I hope I got the pictures right.
Come on, quick! There can be only one.
These are the men of action. And first up, we have Duncan Rouleau, right?
Yeah.
All right, great. Next up, we have Steven Seagal.
Where'd you get these pictures?
I just Google, dude.
Oh, all right.
But wait, I got one of Joe Casey.
Oh yeah. Oh God.
All right, but no, this is the one. Where did I get this picture? You got to ask yourself. Joe Kelly, right there.
Oh my God.
Yeah, with the "You'll Suck" sign.
So what's the
that
game?
Was my buddy Tyler worked at Image, and he was at New York. I think that was.
I remember Tyler. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's my common law brother-in-law.
Oh, wow, nice.
Would you like to pick one person to remain from the Men of Action? You could think of it as your wizard number one, finally.
Well, I'd pick myself, of course. Are you kidding me?
All right, I like to hear that. So Joe Casey picks Joe Casey. Excellent.
Oh yeah.
Joe Kelly was it was you two, and maybe like Busick and Carrie Nord doing Conan. And then the Stray, whatever Grant Morrison's doing. Those were like the comics of the 2000s for. Oh, and I'll put Milligan for the most part up there also.
Yeah.
Those were, you guys were the guys that and I don't mean it guys, but you were the people that were putting out the superior work, if you ask me. And there were other people that worked around you. But almost always it was something that was worthwhile. Was there one project that you were like, man, that's the one? Was it like Godland? Was it something else?
I mean, oh boy. I mean, I really
put you on the spot with that last
one.
Well,
it's not that. It's not that. It's just it's hard to pick, because once you've been around long enough, you look at your career as a body of work, as opposed to, there's no one project anymore. I mean, it hasn't been this way for a long time. I mean, when I first started out, every project was, I felt like make or break, like this is the thing that's going to define me or define my career. But when you're around long enough, that goes away, and every project is its own thing, and you're trying to challenge yourself and challenge the readers in some fashion. And I've never been uptight about any one thing anymore. So it's hard to pick one out, because they all, I mean, I could pick, it's easier to pick out things that are kind of disappointing how they turned out, but then I don't want to say those things publicly. But for the most part, I've been really lucky that the things that I've been able to do, and this is including at Marvel and DC, have been, if you like them, great. If you don't, that's fine. But I'm responsible. There's very few things that I can point to and say, it wasn't my vision, or it wasn't what I wanted it to be. And that includes X-Men, Superman. I mean, hiccups here and there aside, I mean, there's a lot of things at Marvel that I've done, especially, miniseries here and there, that they didn't come to me and say, would you do, Iron Man Enter the Mandarin with Eric Canetti? I took that to them. I initiated those projects. They wouldn't exist if I didn't have the idea. So now your mileage may vary on if you like them or not, but I'm proud to say that I wasn't just a cog in those machines. I initiated my own and curated my own career, even within a work for hire space. So the majority of my work has been what I wanted it to be and what I wanted to put out there. And I guess I'm proud of that, and I'm hopefully still on that path. And Jesus, I hope my best years aren't behind me. Who the hell knows?
Well, I there's no way that's the case necessarily. it's just whether or not we are given the you never know what someone's doing. It just might be their Patreon page. It might
Right.
be Substack these days. And, whether or not there's a physical copy, that's not a guarantee ever anymore.
I think if people like comics, the form of comics, the medium, and it's not about character loyalty, because I know that's a part of it. I mean, there's people who just like Spider-Man, or there's people who just like Batman. That's totally valid. I think for people who are really into comics, they see the self-expression of it. They see that more than any other artistic medium, certainly any storytelling medium, you're getting really, except for maybe novels, you're getting the purest expression of a creator's vision. And it's what attracted me to comics in the beginning. Even when I was a kid and was just reading the Avengers because I liked the characters and I liked the stories. As soon as I could formulate the thought of, no, these are actual humans making this material, creating this material, and it seems like, even in their most misguided moments, they're doing what they want to do. Now, I was probably wrong about some of that, but that's what I took from it. And when I became a professional, that's what I tried to do in my career. I think every professional tries to have the career that they thought their heroes had, even if they didn't really have those careers. But you're trying to replicate the impression that you got from, reading a David Michelinie comic. To me, when I was 8 years old, I thought, here's a guy that's doing exactly what he wants to do. Now, that might not have been the case all the time, and probably wasn't the case most of the time, but that's how the work affected me. So when I decided this is what I wanted to do, that's why I wanted to do it, for that sense of autonomy. So, when I was writing the X-Men or writing Superman, I treated it as though I had, total control, and of course you hit the wall every once in a while. You hit the editorial obstacle, say, oh no, you're not in control. But I never would step back from trying to exact as much of my vision as possible when I was doing those work for hire comics. How did we get on this topic? Jesus Christ.
I don't know. I want to let everybody know that the Image 30th anniversary anthology is monthly. It's going on the entire year. There's been 2 issues out so far, but most importantly, you need to know about issues 5, 6, and 7. Joe Casey, our guest tonight, or whenever you hear this, along with Nathan Fox and Folks, are going to be doing a Dutch 3-part story in those issues. Anything else you need to add as far as that's concerned?
No, I just hope people check it out. I hope you can curate your customers in such a way that those lapsed readers at least know that it exists, and maybe they want to check it out.
Well, I'll do something like say I've got a Vengeance #1 alternate cover. It's worth like, I don't know, hundreds of dollars or something like that. And for anybody in my store that buys the 5th, 6th, and 7th issue, I'll auction off that issue to those people.
That's a pretty good deal. Jeez.
That's a pretty good deal, actually. I guess that stands now. That's the first appearance of Miss America Chavez.
Yep.
Are you like Ed Brubaker? Do you gripe as far as your treatment with the characters and Marvel and all that stuff, the movies?
Let's just say that it's not yet the most equitable situation. People need to do right by other people. That's all. Here's what I will say about those kinds of situations, because every time a creator goes out there and says, yeah, the deal's not great, or I don't have a deal with Marvel or DC or whoever, whatever the work for hire situation is, or whatever the creator equity situation may or may not be. Every time a creator goes out and talks about it publicly, there's always that contingent of fandom that jumps on their ass like they know what they're talking about. Like, you've signed your work for hire deal, or it's work for hire, you should know better. Okay, fair enough. But most creators, as far as I can see, are not claiming ownership. They're not, I'm certainly not, and I don't think Brubaker ever was.
No.
We're
And I
you
was
know,
joking a little bit.
no, I know, but what I'm saying, I'm not saying you do this. I'm just saying there are people out there. I've seen it because I've talked about my situation, and Brubaker's talked about his, and I've seen the blowback. You know,
Yeah.
that blowback comes from people who have a limited understanding of the business and the particulars of this area of the business. They don't know. So all I can say is that nobody, at least that I can see, that find themselves in these situations is claiming ownership. I would never presume that I could ever, initiate any kind of action against Marvel Comics that would result in me owning America Chavez. It's not going to happen, nor should it. But that's not the issue. Ownership is not the issue. And it never has been with the creators that have talked about this. Jim Starlin has never claimed that he should own Thanos, ever. Brubaker's never claimed that he should own the Winter Soldier, ever. So the people that come back at us thinking that we're wanting something that we know is not in the cards, nor do we ever assume it would be, those people need to shut the fuck up.
There you go.
Look, I'm all for reacting emotionally to art, okay? And if your favorite character is being screwed over, or you feel they are in a story, or even in its translation to another medium, whatever, you can say whatever you want. You're reacting emotionally. When you try to bring out what you think are sort of behind the curtain facts about somebody's contract negotiations, or what Kevin Feige's actually thinking or doing in his job, or what Jim Lee's doing in his job, you don't know. You have no idea.
Oh, Jim Lee gets it like crazy right now.
Yeah, and I mean, anybody who thinks they know what Jim Lee's job is are kidding themselves. They're fooling themselves, and again, to speculate on it is totally fine. That's what we all used to do in the comic shops when we get together. We just talk shit about everybody, right?
Right.
But to take that kind of conversation and present it as like news to bolster your platform, or whatever platform you're on, or your channel, or your website, or to get more followers, or to get more likes, or to get more eyes on your stuff. I just don't see the point,
Oh, it's easy to lump everybody together because we all play it a little bit, I guess. I mean, my whole thing is I'm a comic store and I'm just talking to my customers, right?
Right.
So there's really nothing to gain other than I'm just trying to entertain y'all or them. But these other places, websites, oh my God, it's just so shady. I just like the thing that gives me information, please.
I mean, look, if I take a step back, it's all entertainment. It's all the churn of,
Sure.
media. So, I get that. It's just, sometimes I just get irked when it's not presented as that, or it's not being owned up to as like, if somebody wants to be controversial in their opinions, great. But let's not pretend that you're not just trying to gain an audience just like everybody else is. It's all entertainment. It's all just, contributing to the quote unquote media landscape. And to come across as anything but that is disingenuous, in my opinion,
Yeah. Joe, thanks for joining me and shilling your book, Dutch, that's going to be in the Image 30th anniversary issue 5 through 7.
Yes, and the last thing I want to say about it is like I said, I would call this anthology story a pilot episode, because there is more planned. This is the beginning of something, not just a one-off.
That is good to hear. I am looking forward to it because, again, this is the kind of stuff I'm usually into. And I don't think it's being served right now. So thank you so much. And for everybody else out there,
thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, think about subscribing and maybe give us a thumbs up too.